Hello and welcome to Optimize 24 AI. My name is Micheál McGrath. I'm the VP of Marketing here at VisibleThread, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome all of you here today to this session and today's full event. We have an amazing event all ready to go. We have some brilliant speakers. Thank you for joining us this morning, this afternoon, this evening, whatever time zone you're in. We're delighted that you're here. We have an attendee chat on screen. It's great for networking. If you want to let us know where you're coming from, I'm from Cork in Ireland. We have Fergal from Dublin, and we have Steve here in the US. So we have a huge remit of people here today. We have over 2,000 registrants in total. So thank you to all those who've been sharing on social media and pushing the event. It's an incredible day for us in VisibleThread, but also for all the speakers and everybody involved. So thank you so much for pushing today's event. We have 20 speakers in total across 10 different sessions. All sessions today kind of happen back to back. So feel free to join us whenever you can. All recordings, all slides will be delivered after the event. So everything will be recorded and we'll be sharing with all registrations. So if you want people in your network to get the slides and recordings, ask them to register and they will get all the recordings afterwards. We do have a live Q&A. All our sessions today are live. So you'll have the chance to interact with the speakers. So there's a live Q&A box on screen. I'd like you to use that as much as possible. We want as many questions from the audience as we can to make it as interactive as possible. So the more questions, the better. We do have some free resources and content for all the attendees today. So everything in that panel is free to download. We have a great newsletter from Fergal McGovern. We have a newest edition that went published today. So that's linked in the console below, and I'll post it in the attendee chat. Feel free to subscribe. It's very similar to this presentation, taking some notes about hallucinations in AI and things to consider. And finally, we'd love your feedback. Today, there's a huge amount of effort and work went into putting all of today's presentations together. So we'd love to know, what are your favorite sessions? What would you like to see coming from VisibleThread? Any questions you have about the product or where VisibleThread is going or where this content is going, we'd love to hear from you. So feel free to leave your feedback on the form on the screen. Without further ado, this is our agenda today. So we're going from 9 a.m. We are starting with Steve and we're finishing with Steve. We were talking at the beginning. But we have a fantastic agenda. Lots of different speakers from different industries, different focuses. We have proposal and capture managers, BD managers, we have people from contracts, we have people outside industry giving their interpretation. We have organizations such as Shipley, Chamber of Commerce, we have ACOM, we have Amazon, all different types of organizations and different sizes covering lots of different topics. So feel free to tune in at any point today. You can click the logo on the screen and that will bring you to the agenda and you'll be able to see everything and navigate throughout the day. Now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Fergal McGovern and Steve Skeldon for this presentation on this demystifying AI. So Fergal, I pass it over to you.
Great, thanks Micheál, and Steve, great to catch up again with you. I know we did a joint presentation about a month ago or so and it was fun, and hopefully we'll have more fun today. Good stuff. So what we're going to cover out in this session is a number of things. We're going to start up with a little bit of kind of Q&A. We'd like to get your view of a couple of questions. We'll get into generative AI and the principles around how it works. That's important because when you think about Gen AI, it's important to understand the underpinnings. Considerations as you look at Gen AI as to how you think about it in the enterprise setting. We'll look at choosing the tasks that you need to apply Gen AI to. That's section 3. And Steve will give us a kind of a deep dive on his work in Gen AI over the last 6, 9, 12 months and how he and Chickasaw Nation Industries have been looking to leverage this as well. So hopefully there's a good mix of kind of value here. And then if we have time at the end, we'll maybe address some questions and Steve and I will riff and see where we take it. Brilliant. Steve, anything on your side of interest?
No, I'm excited to do this again. It's good. We've even in the last few weeks have been some updates on our side for the tool that we're going to show, and I'm excited.
Brilliant, excellent. So it's going to be hot off the press stuff. That's super duper. So let's start by a whole. What we want to do, the reason for these questions is really just to get a sense of the audience, and that will help Steve and I characterize, how we respond and how we kind of articulate our message. So the first question is, are you currently using any AI technology to support your role? So to be clear, this is in the context of your business activities as opposed to necessarily, doing give me a recipe for a nice cake. So not that kind of stuff, but, are you using ChatGPT? Are you using Gemini? Anything of that nature? Yes, no, or no, and absolutely no plans to do so. In fact, I've chatted with a couple of people, customers of ours, who really are in that camp, that they're very risk averse and not keen to kind of use GenAI. So there's a broad set of things here. So let's just see. We've got 78 responses. So I'll just kind of click to the answers. Excellent. So not quite a dead heat between the yeses and the nos, but not far off it. So very small proportion of you not planning to do so at all. That's cool. 46 and 52. Excellent. Good. So let's get to the next thing. So hopefully this will be very relevant to the vast majority of people on the call. This one is, again, we don't want to necessarily speak down to anybody. We also don't want to maybe oversimplify things, but just on a scale of five being, really quite expert on this stuff, one, maybe you've heard of GenAI, but not much more. Where would you rank yourself in terms of your current awareness and competence around GenAI? So if you can go ahead and answer that, that would be great. And as Steve and I are looking at this on this side, we're seeing kind of the number of attendees in real time. So we've currently got about 42 answers. Let's give it another 20 seconds or so, see if we get some more. 63 of you, 87. Okay, so it's kind of, we're getting a decent sense. Give another a couple of seconds. So again, 5 being kind of, I really know my stuff around, hallucinations and transformer models. 1 is just about another word. Okay, cool. So about half of you responded. Let's see what the result of that is. So a couple of kind of people on the expert category. Most people would self-declare as being kind of somewhere midstream on this, so 41%. And Steve, I think that will help us kind of make sure that we're not speaking at the wrong level, let's say. There was a double negative there. Okay, cool. Let's go to the next session, or next question. What I found lately, and just so that everybody's aware, I'll probably do the first half of this and then I'll transition over to Steve for the second half. But let me kind of give you some of the ideas around first principles of GenAI, and I hope this is helpful. The very first thing I do when I talk to people about GenAI is actually explain that GenAI is not AI. And in fact, this slide that I'm presenting is something that I stole, I have to admit. I stole it from a guy called Alan Sim, who's the head of data within the Center of Disease Control, the CDC, a US federal agency. And he did a wonderful presentation in early December in Washington, DC that I had the privilege to attend. And basically his point was, look, AI has been around a long time, 35, 40 years. The CDC has been using AI for a lot of reasons, disease modeling, spreads, all that kind of stuff for a long time and in multiple different capacities. So this generative AI thing that we all suddenly became aware of in November 2022, it is a type of AI. So keep that in mind. We, in fact, in VisibleThread have been using AI, a different type of AI, for the last 13 years in our products. So kind of keep in mind, generative AI, this kind of, write a sonnet in the style of Shakespeare, that's a relatively new phenomenon. It was, in fact, invented by Google in 2017. So it's actually not that new, but OpenAI brought it to the zeitgeist, and that's when things happened. Good, that's the first point. So this generative AI thing, it's predicated on a thing called a large language model. And again, for the ones who scored 5 and scored themselves 5, you'll know all this stuff, right? So I apologize, but it's useful to get our kind of language right. And LLMs, large language models, the GPT 3.5 that underpins ChatGPT, or GPT-4 that underpins ChatGPT, that's an LLM, GPT-4. Google have their version. They've now rebranded it as Gemini. There's a very fine open source model called Mistral. which again is a leading model, but there are thousands of these models. And then applications use models. So I'm just kind of laying that out, and applications including ours, VisibleThread, will use a model. And anytime you interface with a chat bot, you're using an application. You're not actually using the LLM directly. Good. So let me go to the next slide. How actually does the LLM work? Well, for this, I'm kind of, again, stealing somebody better able and more intelligent than myself to actually use their words. The quote on the right, so Gary Marcus is a very well-known, dare I say it, luminary in the AI space. He cites or kind of suggests LLMs are basically generating responses. That's the generative bit in the generative AI. They're generating responses by using a model to sample words. And it's all based on probabilities. And the language behind that is based on tokens. And in a very simplistic way, a token, think about it as a word. So I'm going to give you a little kind of fun test, if I will, or if I may, which I've been using recently. And I'm going to ask you a question. My question is this. When I say Jack and Jill, what do you think comes next? And I'd love to kind of get the audience reaction on this. So do you think Jack and Jill ran up the hill? Do you think Jack and Jill went up the hill? A charitable foundation for kids in need, or you've never heard of Jack and Jill? That last answer, by the way, I was speaking to somebody in Brazil last week, and they had no reference model for Jack and Jill. I also spoke to a couple of German people 2 weeks ago. They had no reference model. So we've got 79 responses. This is going to be interesting. I've never done this in real time. I've just done it kind of verbally polling people. So let's see what you guys say. So it's not quite a dead heat, but most people are on the went up the hill side. Many of you are on the ran up the hill side. I'm actually in the ran up the hill. That's how I learned it when I was actually growing up. 0.9, that's great, or a charitable foundation. And some of you have no awareness of this. Why am I asking you this rather trite question? Because don't take it literally, but if you can think about an LLM as being equivalent to your brain, and the training in the model is equivalent to your awareness that you learn as a kid growing up, that's why I'm asking the question. So those who said ran up the hill or went up the hill or is a charitable foundation, that's your kind of model. That's your reference model based on your experience in life. So it's kind of important to think about LLMs. There is no right or wrong answer. The model contains the answer, and it's a predictive mechanism. So it's spitting out words at you that will be based on its model. Good. I hope that made sense. I hope you're beginning to get the sense of LLMs and AI and what they do. Let me go to the next point here. The key takeaways here are that the answers are variable. The truth depends on the model, and they're basically generated on predictions or probability. That's how AI generally works, and that's specifically how generative AI works. It's based on models. Good. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about hallucinations, and this is really, really, really important. And the reason it's really important is that it helps you understand where to apply generative AI, in what context, and equally where not to. So here, I'm going to clarify a few bits and pieces. I hope I'm not getting too geeky on this, so forgive me on this, but I have to kind of bore you with some of this stuff. LLMs are what's referred to as non-deterministic in computer science. What that basically means is that when you ask it a question, because of its model and its predictive nature, you may or may not get the same result every time. And also you may not and won't get one result and only one result. So if I say 2 + 2, the answer is 4. That is the only answer. It can't be 3.8. That is a deterministic thing. It's a mathematical equation. So it tends not to be, LLMs tend not to be good at mathematical use cases. Although that's, it's getting better, but they tend not to be good. So I'm going to give you a real example of this. This is me the other day asking Copilot, which I'm sure everybody's heard of Copilot. It's the Microsoft kind of add-in assistant for Office and various other places. I asked it, what's the grade level of a 45-word sentence? The specific 45-word sentence was in the prompt. And it came back very confidently saying the grade level was 12.3. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with grade level, it is a proxy for the complexity of content. The higher the number, the more complex the content, the lower, the less complex. The actual answer to the question is 21.6. Now that's a pretty big difference between what it came back with and the true answer. Why is that? This is why. Because grade level is a mathematical formula. This is the actual mathematical formula by which you calculate grade level. So there are times and places where you should use GenAI and times and places where you should not. One of the times and places where you should not use it is when you want an accurate answer to something like grade level. So I think it's important to realize that GenAI is not the kind of the silver bullet. It's if you wield a GenAI hammer, everything suddenly becomes a nail. And I think that's important to kind of understand. So keep the balance, keep the perspective on what GenAI is good for and what it is not so good for. Hallucinations and this idea kind of help, I hope, underscore that. The impact of hallucinations is really interesting. And I know this isn't necessarily to do with proposal and capture, but the impact is really the same impact. So this is a case study that the UK government digital arm, responsible for kind of UK websites and properties, did over the last 6 months. And they published their research on this in January 18th. So they ran a trial using a chatbot and ran it with a controlled environment with controlled real users. And what they found was that basically the answers were not at the highest level of accuracy that they needed for a site like gov.uk. So a government agency couldn't stand over, they couldn't effectively leave the LLM to do its work reliably because it was giving unfactual or infactual answers. And that's really important. The second conclusion, and again, everybody understands this, when you're told something by an authority figure, you tend to believe it. And even though there's disclaimers in all of these chatbots saying, double, check your facts, and all of them do it. This may not necessarily be factual. People are people, and our kind of behavioral psychology is such that we will believe as a default what we get back from any computer system. And in this case, you can see the quote, there were some misunderstandings about how generative AI works, and they concluded this could lead to users having misplaced confidence in a system that could be wrong some of the time. So my message here is whatever you get back from a generative AI system, trust it, but verify it. And in fact, don't trust it too much. Verify everything, because it is a model that is predictive and it's not a mathematical base model. Okay, I hope that's helpful. Let me go to choosing your use cases wisely here. I better speed up in the interest of time. So Steve, I'll soon get it over to you. Bear with me.
Sure.
So I want you to kind of apply, as you think about GenAI and using it, ask yourself these questions. If you need 100% accurate results, or do you need 100% accurate results? Do you need 100% repeatable results? In other words, if I run the same prompt today and I run the exact same prompt tomorrow, do I get the same results in GenAI land? The answer is no. If you need repeated results, then you really need to think about not using GenAI for that task. And then the final thing here, which is a little bit more subtle, if you need to know the logic by which you got the results, in other words, we did this, then we did this, then we did this, using a GenAI approach is not the best mechanism for that if you need logic behind it. Okay, so I don't mean to be all doom and gloom, but I'll keep going with the wrong tasks and then we'll get to the right tasks to apply it. So what are examples of wrong tasks? Things like user management, configuration, shredding of, something like, Word doc, accurate shredding, getting an Excel output, comparison of docs, grade level we've talked about a moment ago. So these are the wrong use cases to apply GenAI to. It will guess, and it won't necessarily guess correctly, depending on the model. It may be somewhat accurate or maybe completely inaccurate, similar to my earlier example of the grade level. The correct use cases to apply GenAI to in general tend to be creative tasks. It's phenomenally good at text creation. It's amazing at simplification. It's really good at summarization. But these are kind of subjective things. your idea of how good a summary is your idea. It's your kind of, judgment call. They're really good at things where good enough is fine, where you don't need 100% accuracy. That's what they're really good at doing. So within a balance of probability, you more or less get the right answer. That's the way to think about it. So if you're doing firmware for an MRI machine and you need to accurately detect things, you don't want to be using GenAI for that, but certain parts of that process may well be GenAI. So what you find is that GenAI is often worked in combination with quote unquote deterministic models in software products. And that applies to our product as well as any other products out there. Okay, let me give you a great example of where it's really good. And I'm going to kind of, if I may, I'll just show you this in a quick demo, and then we'll hand over to Steve. So I'm just going to share my screen. I'm going to give you a quick demo on this. Where is it good? So here I am going to attempt to share my full screen. Cool. So this is Microsoft Word, and everybody's familiar with Microsoft Word. This is our VT Writer product. This here is a reasonably complicated set of content. It's actually a financial institution sending a notice to a related party where the party is actually declaring bankruptcy. Again, you could view this as, it could be an executive summary in a proposal. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to sign in here, and I'm going to give you a quick sense of where we might use this. Okay, so I've signed in. So what you're seeing on the right is basically an assessment of the content on the left. We can see that there's kind of traffic light systems going on here. So we're assessing the grade level of each paragraph on the left. This is a really good way to get a more accessible, clearer, single tone of voice output on the left. So these are objective metrics. And again, as I say, none of what you're seeing on the right so far is GenAI, nor should it be, because we want to accurately identify long sentences, accurately identify passive voice, all that kind of good stuff. What's interesting here, though, is that it says 21.1. Here's the GenAI bit kicking in. It knows the job it's trying to do. So we've basically scored the content, making sure that the most complex content is flagged. So I'm going to click Simplify here. Now I'm handing over to generative AI. Now I'm asking it to simplify the first paragraph here. And while it's doing that, I'll just read it out. The first paragraph read, a review of your account reflects that you're currently in a situation of bankruptcy and that we've recorded the interest of your trustee in bankruptcy in your property, which now requires us to have your trustee's authorization to proceed with your settlement option. It's a crazy statement. It's 45 words. It's way complex. And that kind of stuff can appear in proposals. It can appear all over the place. Here's the options that we get back. So we know the job we're trying to do here. We're very clear. We get 3 different options, and we could, if we needed, get more. In this case, I'm just going to swap in the first option. That's a way better way of articulating that. This is the great advantage of GenAI. It's really strong at actually doing simplification tasks. We can also generate fresh copies of stuff, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to pause and I'll stop sharing, and then we'll come back to the deck. And I think I may hand over to Steve. Bear with me here a second. Great. So Steve, over to you, and I'll continue moving the slides on, and you can kind of speak to them.
Great. So Fergal, that was fantastic. And a lot of what you said would have been useful in my early days of understanding generative AI, because it would have helped me move through these use case definitions a lot faster. So when we all heard about generative AI, one of the first things that we thought is this is going to fix everything. Obviously, it doesn't. Right? Understanding how it works, the probability model that Fergal just talked about, and why hallucinations happen, and the fact that it's non-definitive and it can't really be used for math, that limits a lot of the potential applications that you may come up with, especially from a financial sense. As Fergal said, it's getting better, but it's not quite there yet. So it's important. Knowing the why, the how it works is, I think, an underpinning to really developing the best way to go about it. You next. So when ChatGPT really kind of got big, everybody was playing with it, and then it was different departments were doing different things with it. HR was developing job descriptions. We were doing proposal content. I don't know what finance was doing, but they must have been doing something because we suddenly got an email from our CEO saying, don't use it, don't put proprietary information in it, because we were using the open model, which goes out and it doesn't so much train the LLM, but it does go into the database for researchers to use. So it goes out into kind of an unsecured area. So my leadership and I sat down and we figured out what a wish list of what we wanted AI. And some of those things included, and I can't recall, are those on the next slide? Yeah. Some of those things from a short-term perspective were document synopsis, putting in an opportunity or a PWS or a statement of work and getting a quick 3-paragraph summary of what that work is, and then baseline content generation, which is something that Fergal just demonstrated. The document synopsis especially was something that popped to mind because we answer a lot of RFIs and as a small business. And one thing that I could use a lot of help with in speeding up that process is using contracts that I know are good, but we don't have a generated past performance for. So I can sit down and try and generate, 3 to 4 sentences summarizing the whole thing, or I can feed it into a model and let it spit it out. And we weren't able to do that with the open model, because not everything that we have, while it's not necessarily our proprietary, it's not public. So we were hesitant to do that. And then the baseline content generation, that's something that I've been able to do lately with the new model that we've got, that I'll demonstrate in a moment, which is taking resumes and generating summaries, things like that. So what we wanted to do in the long term, though, is generate tailored content, feed the large language model all of our proposal content, all of our goodness, and have it spit it out in, a C&I voice. And that's from a proposal perspective. From a larger BD perspective, what I was really excited about was being able to take an opportunity and run it against our entire corpus of past performance and say which of our past performances best fit here. And similarly, to take that same opportunity and run a competitive analysis by taking that opportunity and running it against a set of market data to determine what, sorry for anyone from GDIT, but you're the example right now, what GDIT would do on this opportunity versus what we would do and how to best ghost them based on publicly available information. So kind of supercharging our competitive analysis and black hat processes. And then the end goal, for me anyways, would be to take all of our past performance and run it against all of the open opportunities on SAM or whatever other database, and be able to generate a top 10 list of best fit opportunities based on our strengths and our past performance and our ability to handle it, and hopefully take a little bit of the manual nature out of combing GovWin and whatnot. And so that the 4 on the right are not there yet. The 2 on the left are. So we are able to do the document synopsis and the baseline content generation. Can you go next? Thank you. So through this process, we evaluated the market. We sat through a lot of demos, and what we saw was mostly frameworks sitting on top of an existing LLM. It was calling out to ChatGPT, or it was calling out to Gemini or whatnot. And it added some additional functionality, but the basics were they reminded me of the early days of cell phone applications, where it was everyone wanted an app, so they would download. You'd see, Walmart has an app, and you would download it, and you would open it, and it was just a web frame that just displayed their website inside of an icon on your home screen, versus an actual full functioning application with its own set of functionality. And I think we're going to get there, but the most of the demos that I've seen to this point are that wrapper on top of another LLM. A lot of them had a pretty steep learning curve. A lot of them were difficult to assess because you couldn't really do a trial because of the implementation costs. So it just rapidly became a bridge too far to accurately understand what the marketplace could do for us without paying for it. So our internal IT team took the initiative and generated an in-house tool. They initially generated a web version, and they most recently, in the last few months here, have rolled out a desktop version. And what that does, they have a license with the GPT AI, so it still goes out to the AI, but it doesn't. We're working on our licensing agreement to get the actual language right, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't go out into a public kind of pool of data. So they've implemented digital loss prevention so that certain things can't go out, keyword filters to make sure that we don't put CUI or ITAR data into it. And we've actually just got the ability, and I have not tested it yet, to ingest PDF and Word. So the ability to take a whole PWS and drag and drop it in to get a summary. I'm not going to demo that today because, again, I have not had a chance to play with it. But what I would like to do is take a moment to demonstrate that. And Fergal, if you could go to the next slide. This is the interface for it. It's a prompt. It's very straightforward. It's prompt, response, and then history. Because it's generative and it's contextual, you can have a conversation with it, and it can consider things from previous parts of your conversation. And this one has options for different models. I'm just going to stick with the default settings for this. But let me pull up my screen here. All right. So to best use an LLM, what we need to do is understand how to ask it what we want. What I've been using is a model that I found called the CRISPE model, CRISPE. And that stands for capacity and role, insight, statement, personality, and then experiment. And so you'll feed it what your role is, what the LLM is going to act as in this particular case. In this case, I've said your role is a proposal manager working on a proposal for a large defense contracting company. The insight is you're working on a proposal for DLA, and just to see what it would do, and it may not spit out what I want it to on this one because it's given a different answer almost each time that I've used it. I said it's important to the DLA that the proposals mention banana soup. So, and then I tell it what I want it to do, which is 3 paragraphs on how to accurately inventory a large DLA warehouse using inventory standards. And then I tell it how it should sound. So I say, well, this is a proposal document, so we want to portray ourselves as competent and professional. And then I asked it to provide 3 different versions of that text. And so I'll take that prompt and I'll feed it into the model and then just click submit. And we will see if it mentions banana soup in the inventory process that it's going to tell us. So as you can see, give us 1, 2, 3 different, roughly 3 paragraph options. Unfortunately, I don't see banana soup in any of these. So this is where the contextual portion comes in. You didn't mention banana soup. And so now it'll take those and probably add on a sentence saying, you know, using banana soup, we will inventory the warehouse. What this to me demonstrates, and what it should demonstrate to everybody, yeah, there it is, capturing unique information such as banana soup inventory. What this tells me is that you can't take this straight away and plug it into your proposal and say, good, well, we're all done. What I'll then do is I'll take this and I will put it into my document and edit it to make sure that it's really the best that I can do. And the beauty of that is that it overcomes the tyranny of the blank page. And that's a shout out to an old boss of mine, Jeff Leitner, who introduced me to that phrase. But the tyranny of the blank page, to me, is a big stopping point. And I'm sure that it is for others as well. But getting something down on paper is really helpful. Yesterday, I was working on a proposal, and I had 7 resumes, and 6 of them had a summary, and the 7th didn't. And I said, I don't know this person. It's a fairly long resume. So I copied the whole resume in, and I ran it through that prompt generator. I said, I need a summary for a resume for a proposal, and it gave me 2 paragraphs. And they weren't perfect, but I got them pretty quickly into a summary that was workable. I did the same thing for the introduction to the proposal. I didn't know the customer very well. This was kind of handed to us from a recent acquisition. And so I said, I fed it the vision statement from the customer's website. I said, can you quickly generate through 2 paragraphs of a customer-focused introduction? And it did quite nicely. It gave me a really good starting point to have that conversation. And I sat down with the technical lead and I said, how does this sound? And she gave me a few pointers, and then we got it in. And it probably took me about half or less of the time that it would have for me to go out and do the deep dive and learn about the customer, which there's no substitute for that. In this particular case, it was a time versus need thing. So that it was a really helpful tool in that. We're a high volume proposal shop. As a Tribal 8A, we go through a lot of proposals. And so having the ability to generate that kind of speed and momentum is really helpful for us. That's, I think, the big stuff. Fergal, was there anything that I didn't touch on that we had talked about?
No, I think, I guess just the idea of the banana soup example, I know it's a bit kind of bizarre, but I think Steve's point there, at least for me at any rate, was when you want to, when you tell it, hey, look, do something, but this is really important, so make sure you don't forget that. You can't assume that will be understood in the way you think it's going to be understood. And I think that's the interesting point about the demonstration. So you always need to review whatever an LLM returns to you and use it as a kind of an enabling technology as opposed to necessarily a definitive, this is the truth technology. That's the biggest takeaway I would have.
Yeah, and that definitive, this is the truth technology. I had a conversation with somebody from our market strategy department. We were talking, we went back and forth, and we said, can we use this for, understanding how, broader market spending trends work? And we went back and forth for a few minutes, and then I remembered something that I had heard from another demo about the probabilistic model and realized that, no, this isn't quite what we can use that for, because we don't want probabilistic analysis of hard dollars, right? We want actual definitive analysis. It's math. It's not words per se.
Yeah, it's a great point, Steve. Actually, I came across a kind of a review of Microsoft Copilot, which is now fully rolled out, and everybody is, or many people are using it, including myself. And it's deployed into all of the Office stack, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Mail. And the one area during their studies, during their kind of initial deployments where they found lackluster take-up was actually Excel. And this is feedback loops coming from customers who would have used it. And largely the reason is because Excel tends to be, no surprise, a kind of a mathematical thing. Of course, you can use it for maintaining lists, and we all use it for, compliance matrices and all that kind of stuff. But fundamentally, if you're actually looking at, again, it's back to what is the task you're trying to ask it to do, or you expect it to do. If it's a more mathematical task, by and large, the model can't know the answer because it has to know the answer in order to give you the result you expect to be an accurate result. I wonder at this point, so I think that's the end of our slides in our presentation, Steve. We've had a few more than a few, there's at least 17 to 20 questions in on the question side. That's great. Robert Candy asked, how do you determine the true answer, quote unquote? I'm not sure, Robert, what the actual context of when you asked the question, but I guess that's the problem. Truth is a subjective thing when it comes to LLMs, and maybe that's life as well. I'm not sure. Michal, any other questions there strike you as interesting?
That question was in referred to your Jack and Jill example. So your Jack, how did it, why did it pick that answer? What was your, that's the point of it.
Thanks for that context. So the actual, my analogy, and I'm not sure if it's working very well. You be the judge of it. Maybe we should do a poll. Did my example work very well? But that's a different thing. But it seems to make some sense, at least to me, and maybe I'm peculiar. But the point about the question was largely, truth is very subjective, and it is down to our respective training as human beings. I know that I'm mixing words like training. It's kind of nature nurture stuff. Our nurture piece of our kind of growing experience taught us to say, ran up the hill, went up a hill, or some more recent knowledge around charitable foundations, or indeed, if I'm in a non-English speaking culture, probably you never heard of the nursery rhyme. And your nursery rhyme could be something completely different, or your reference model could be something completely different. So I suppose the point I'm trying to make is basically the model dictates what is truth and what is not truth.
Well, I think it would be interesting to have that data cross-cut against culture, right? Like maybe predominantly Northern European or British countries say ran, and North American say went, right? I'm not sure. I heard ran growing up, but that doesn't necessarily mean.
Steve, excellent. You're on the minority. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Maybe you grew up in a household that was looking to be extremely fit. Who knows? But in any case, there you go. What else do we have on the questions?
I'm gonna pull two together, Fergal.
Sure.
There's one that connects with your grade level example. What if I ask ChatGPT or one of these models to give me a grade level of X? And there's a very similar question where it says, what if I ask one of these models to not give hallucinations or only give me factual information? Asking and trying to remove the hallucinations in the prompt. Is that possible?
No is the answer, because prompts are prompts. So you can, I think Steve's banana soup example is great. You can tell it to do things. You can assert that this is really important, but you will be blue in the face and I have very little hair, but whatever is there will be gone. True frustration. So the art of good prompting is actually the art of massaging, there's what's known in prompt land as a prompt chain. So you ask one question, you say, well, that's not really great. Can you just give me 3 different variations on that? You can't, logic is not really what's at play here. You're just building on more context. So actually, technically what's happening is that each time you ask an LLM a question and a subsequent clarification question and a subsequent clarification question, it's adding all of those things into the last prompt, if that makes sense. Underneath the covers, all of these things are chained together and they all go in one call to the LLM. So there isn't actually a discrete set of steps that these LLMs take that are in any way logical. Again, I'm getting a little geeky here, but I hope it makes sense.
No, it does, absolutely. We had the most recent question there from Albert refers to, in your opinions, in the future, do you think these models will be mature enough to take heed of company information? So the likes of all the background information that Steve, in your career, will it be able to kind of access that in a more intelligent way? What's your opinions on that?
I might just take that if I may. And Steve, I'd love to hear your view on this as well, because I suspect you're at the same stuff. I think everybody on this call is asking for the same answer, and that answer is yes. Let's for instance use an LLM to create an executive summary for a proposal, or let's use it to create the management volume or some elements of the technical volume. That's very fair. But the real question is, the LLM in a raw format doesn't really know your context. It doesn't know the industry you operate in. It doesn't know your past performance. It doesn't know all this other stuff. So what you use, and it's not so much a future thing, it's a current pattern. What you would use is a thing called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, which is a way to kind of ground the results with pre-existing, often proprietary content that's in your kind of repository. So typically that might be a SharePoint library. That's exactly the direction we're going at VisibleThread, is the idea of actually grounding, using the LLM for what it's good at, and equally not using it for what it's bad at. But then when it's good at that, for instance, show me all the past performance where we've done this type of work around cybersecurity before. Great. Let's kick into the LLM. Let's kind of combine it with the proprietary information in our past performance library, assuming you're using SharePoint, for instance, and let's make that the kind of feed. It's still prone to hallucinations, but the likelihood of it getting it more right increases. So the fundamentals of LLMs haven't changed, but what you're doing is you're almost binding it or bounding it within certain guardrails, if you will. Steve, what's I'm guessing you guys are equally trying to do that in the context of Jigsaw.
Yeah, and I'm not certain that the model that the tool that I demonstrated is going to be something that will end up doing that. We'll probably end up coming with a commercial tool for that, something like VisibleThread, because that retrieval augmented generation is solving the problem that I mentioned in those long-term use cases, right? The long-term use cases feed from that company data. They feed from your past performance library. They feed from your and on the other side, not only your data, but if I want to run it against the entire marketplace, it would feed from an API call to SAM or GovWin or something like that, some sort of body of opportunities that it would compare the two against. And it's a lot of math that I don't fully understand, but having seen it work, it is very impressive and it's very exciting as a supercharger for the human brain. One question that was asked, kind of to that point, why use 3.5 when you have access to 4? Doesn't quality beat speed? Sure. I've run it through both. The particular prompts that I put in there, the answers were very, very similar. And so from that aspect, I just default to 3.5 because I'm going to go through it and tweak it anyways. Part of that is almost a forcing factor so I don't get over-reliant on it. I want to make sure that I take the time to go through it and apply that human brain to it. We've all seen Terminator. I'd rather not get there any faster than we need to. So I don't want to enable the machine brain to replace me any sooner than I have to.
And Steve, that's a great point. I think there's, if you've just triggered a thought. So I listened to a fantastic podcast a couple of weeks ago from a guy called Jonathan Ross, who's invented a new silicon architecture, which is kind of potentially threatening NVIDIA in terms of how it's actually set up. It's basically 350 chips all running in parallel in a very different way. But my point is that the efficiency of this new architecture is incredible. Anyway, that's geeking out, going in a different direction. My point there, he brought up a very interesting point. He said, look, it's not about the number of parameters in the large language model, which is, most people think, well, the more parameters, the better it will be. It's about the way you prompt. So he said there's a very simple thing you can do with ChatGPT 3.5, that older model. Ask it a question and tell it to redo the question in 5 better ways. Very simple. And just by chaining like that, you will get way better outcomes and way better results. So that's point number one. The second point, and we didn't cover it here, is the security of this stuff. And I'm seeing some questions on the kind of the chat area. You know, how do you make sure it's secure? And I know, Steve, you mentioned, you know, using ChatGPT, but your kind of CEO said, look, don't use ChatGPT because it's into the public cloud, which it is. It's also into a proprietary model, which it is. But the way to avoid that, and I think there's 1 or 2 questions around this, how do we at VisibleThread do 100% secure, 100% lockdown AI in controlled environments, which we do? We deploy an LLM. The one that we use is called Mistral 7B. It's the tippity top of the best permissively licensed LLMs. By that I mean an LLM that you can deploy, and all of you can deploy this. Your IT colleagues can deploy this. And I suspect, Steve, if you do go down the road of wanting to analyze proprietary information separately and kind of build it out yourselves, you will end up deploying that type of large language model on premise and completely isolated. Nothing goes external outside of your firewall. For regulated industries, that's the only way to go. You can't have this stuff going outside of your firewall.
I love it. That's a great answer. And Steve, I think that's the third time you've mentioned Terminator on a VisibleThread webinar. So I think that's a good kind of record to keep up.
I always tell my wife to be nice to Alexa so that they'll be nice to us when they take over. So
yeah, very good.
I think you're having bad dreams these nights, Steve.
Kevin, we answered your initial question in regards, could you eventually feed an LLM, or like Fergal talked about SharePoint and accessing particular set of data points. But then you refer to like what type of model does VisibleThread work in? Fergal, could you answer that? What type of model how's our product? Why is it the same? Why is it different?
Sure. Let me try and kind of unpack it a little bit. So the first thing is that LLMs, large language models, don't learn as a rule. They're kind of baked. So when you train a large language model, it goes through what's known as training, and once it's trained, that's it. It's done. It doesn't learn from then on. You can do a thing called fine-tuning a model, which effectively is evolving the model to, for all intents and purposes, a new model, and that changes some elements of the internal model. But typically, there is a misunderstanding out there that LLMs are learning. They're not. They're kind of baked. Our posture at VisibleThread, because we are working with very, very security conscious customers, 11 of the top 15 government contractors use our products, so they cannot have content going outside the firewall. Our VT-Docs and VT-Writer products both completely run isolated in completely locked down environments. And that's really critical. It's less critical if you're a small to medium business and maybe you're doing a lot of kind of non-sensitive content. You may be able to use ChatGPT in that context. I wouldn't dissuade you from doing that, but just keep an eye on what is it you're putting into the cloud. If you're in healthcare, for instance, and you're dealing with PII data, personally identifying information, that's important to not put that into the cloud. Okay, what's our kind of general mix in terms of our products? So VT-Docs, VT-Writer. Docs is our review product. Writer is our creative, Grammarly-esque product that runs 100% secure, which Grammarly doesn't. You can't deploy Grammarly behind the firewall. We are shipping the LLM I mentioned a moment ago called Mistral 7B. And as that gets upgraded, that will also get upgraded. Equally, we are allowing and catering for the fact, and this is what's happening right now in medium to large organizations, internal LLMs are being deployed and built by your IT teams to do internal jobs. And so equally, we can hook in with those internal LLMs as well. So it's built in a way that we can kind of say, well, fine, you don't have an LLM yet, use ours, which is not ours. We're using one of the best of breeds out there that's permissively licensed, or hook in with your own, because that makes a lot more sense. Our products are not just thin veneers over an LLM. They're very rich. They do jobs. The jobs are sometimes and often deterministic jobs, meaning mathematical jobs. And some of the tasks are those that I've just demonstrated, creative type tasks that LLMs are really great at doing.
Now, before we're getting close to the end of this session, before we let everybody go, Steve, first of all, do you have any kind of parting words, parting anecdotes that you want to share?
Sure, yeah. One thing, Fergal, you mentioned about brand damage and chatbots. I read an article probably last week or the week before. There was an airline, I don't remember which one, somebody tried to book a bereavement fare because somebody in their family had passed away, and they asked the chatbot, how do I do this? And the chatbot said, book it and apply for reimbursement after the flight. So he did that. And he came back, and it was completely contrary to their policy, and they took it to court. And the way that I believe that came down is they settled because I think the airline probably saw that they had deployed this chatbot and not really vetted it. The chatbot was not obviously using retrieval augmented generation and fed the customer bad information. I think that there is, when you're tied to a brand and you are a trusted brand, like you said, people are going to believe what's on your website, whether or not the disclaimer says it may not be true, right? So as you go forward,
exactly.
You're customer facing. That's something really important to remember.
The actual, I saw the same story, Steve. It's a great one. It was actually Air Canada. Now they're using a pre-GPT, a precursor of 3.5 GPT for this. They put it out live. Their defense, by the way, from a legal standpoint, was kind of crazy. Their defense was, well, you shouldn't have trusted the chatbot. That was effectively their defense. Okay. You should have known better. So you just can't be doing that kind of stuff. So again, employees who are allowed to use chat interfaces or LLM interfaces, it's not on the employee if they get responses that are fundamentally fake, that are not right. You really have to be careful with this stuff. And there's a thing called guardrails. That's just why if you go to Google and Gemini right now, there's a lot of hot water, or they got into a lot of hot water over the last number of weeks about generating imagery that was utterly inaccurate around historical figures, because they've got a bias in the model. They're trying to offset biases based on diversity and inclusion. And as a result, they created a photo of George Washington, which was completely inaccurate, and various other historical figures. So if you want to Google that in your spare time, but Gemini and Google are going through a little bit of trouble at the moment based on inaccurate stuff.
Good. Any parting words, Fergal?
No, I think I've said enough. Thanks for everybody's forbearance and putting up with me. Appreciate it.
No, so that was a super session, Steve, Fergal. Thank you both. I'll do a little bit of cleanup and housekeeping. We've had such great interaction on the chat and in the Q&A box. Please keep doing that all day. We'd love to see that interaction. The more questions, the better. We're going to get back out to everybody, even if we didn't get to those questions. If you could give us feedback, there's a form on the right-hand side. You can give us a little bit of feedback about this session. We'd love to have your questions. I was looking at the chat, and I just want to send people in the right directions. Some people don't be worried if you're at the very early stages of AI. Some people are apologizing, going, what is an LLM? That's okay. There's loads of content today that will cover the very basics to really technical stuff. I'd point you at Fergal's newsletter if you're at the very basic end in terms of you want to have something really simple. Fergal does a bi-weekly newsletter. A new version went out today. It's in the resources channel, and I put it in the attendee chat. There's a great discussion there on hallucinations, and Fergal broke it down really, really well. There's a lot of questions about the product and VisibleThread and our stance. There is a session at 11 o'clock where we're going to show the product. Fergal did a very small demo in this presentation, but he'll be back again at 11 o'clock Eastern time to do a more intensive demo with our VP of Engineering to speak about security and the full breakdown of that. So that's quite detailed. And if you want to hear more from Steve, which I know you do, Steve has put together an amazing panel at the very end of the day at 4:30. He's brought together some of the international board from AP&P. He's a really brilliant panel there at the very end of the day. But we have a superb agenda for you. Now, the last thing I'll do is I'll introduce the next session, which is going to be Noelle Russell. Noelle Russell is not in the proposal industry. She is a MVP of Microsoft in terms of AI. She's spoken at GovAI. She's been on the Boston Globe speaking about AI. She is looking at our industry from an external perspective, from a enterprise perspective. She's a really phenomenal speaker. You don't have to do anything. When we close this session off, you'll be redirected to that session, and that's the way it'll work all day long. You'll move from session to session to session. If you ever need to leave us, you can always come back to the landing page, or the email you received this morning has all the direct links for all the sessions today. So final thank you to Fergal and Steve. Great conversation. We'll hear more from you later on, and enjoy Noelle Russell's presentation. Thank you so much.